That evening, everything was as usual. We were having dinner on the porch, the old porch of our house in Richmond, Virginia. In the summer, it smells of cut grass, aged wood, and faintly of tobacco, the kind Frank still smokes, despite every doctor's warning. He's still the same, stubborn, neatly dressed, and nearly silent unless it's about baseball or gas prices. I had made rosemary chicken, just the way he likes it. Took the leftover potato salad from the fridge, the one I made 2 days ago, still fresh. I know how to preserve food, how to preserve silence, and how to preserve a marriage. We sat in our wicker chairs, the last streaks of sunset deepening above us. He leaned back with a bottle of beer in hand, stared off toward the horizon, and said, "You've been a convenient woman for 40 years. Calmly, like he was balancing a checkbook. No blame, no gratitude, just fact. I nodded. I know. I didn't have to pretend. I truly did know. He kept looking ahead, like he was talking more to himself. You never complained, never asked unnecessary questions. The kids were fed, the house was clean. I could focus on work without distraction. No yelling. You were just there, always. A pause. He took a sip of beer and added, "Not everyone's like that." I looked at him. His whitening hair, thick eyebrows, hands marked with age spots. He'd grown old, but only on the outside. Inside, he was still living in 1983, when I had said, "Of course I'll leave teaching, Frank. Of course I'll take care of the house, just for a couple of years while you build the business." A couple of years stretched into 40, and I was convenient. He thought he was paying me a compliment. And in some strange way, I wasn't even offended. I simply knew. He had never noticed when I started to change. When I stopped slipping notes into his lunchbox. When I put my last painting away in the closet. When I deleted my manuscript from the computer and later restored it and began writing again, under a different name. He never noticed when I started setting boundaries with the kids. When I opened a secret savings account at Bank of America. When I first flew to Portland to visit a friend, I had told him. In truth, I was speaking at a women's conference. But why say any of that now? I sat across from him, as I had 1,000 times. Wearing a lavender dress, a thin cardigan, my hair tousled gently by the breeze. And in that moment, I felt a strange, quiet calm, cold but steady. I no longer needed to argue. No longer needed to prove anything. He simply didn't know who I had become. And I had no intention of telling him. I looked up at the sky. It was softly lilac, like old cashmere. Birds flew by. A distant ambulance siren wailed. Somewhere in a neighboring house, the evening news theme played on a television. Everything was ordinary, cozy, familiar. He stood up, tossed his empty bottle into the trash, glanced back over his shoulder. "Coming inside? It's getting late." I smiled. "You go ahead. I'll sit a little longer." He nodded. Went inside, letting the screen door shut behind him. And I stayed. Closed my eyes. Breathed slowly. In my head, his words echoed. "You've been a convenient woman for 40 years. I almost left. Almost. The next morning, I didn't wake up. Frank found me still in the chair, as if I'd simply drifted off. A blanket lay across my lap, and in my hand I held an old locket with a tiny key inside. He never asked what the key was for. And now he never will. I died peacefully. No drama, no trumpets, no final speeches. Just gone. Like music fading in an empty hall when no one claps. Frank did what he was supposed to. He called 9-1 -1, but he didn't scream, didn't panic. He told the operator calmly, "My wife, she died. Just didn't wake up." 40 minutes later, the house was full of people. Medics, an officer, Mrs. Bland from next door who came to help with things. 2 hours later, the kids were called. Catherine, Stephen, Ellie, they flew in the next day. Some from New York, some from Austin, some from Seattle. They came as if to a brief business meeting with a lifelong crossed out in their planners. The funeral was decent. Everything arranged at the peaceful Rest Chapel funeral home. White lilies, moderately warm words, a catalogue of urn choices. Frank picked one resembling marble, though I dreamed of being scattered over the Shenandoah. The pastor was young, too smiley. His voice reminded me of the announcers on the Christian radio I sometimes listened to on the way to Walmart. He said, "Evelyn Brooks was a woman of quiet strength." He didn't know how close to the truth that was, and how far. The hall was full. My neighbors, with whom I exchanged pies, old friend Martha, with whom we'd shared 10 years of silence, women from church who considered me reliable, meek, devoted. Each thought they knew me. But they only knew the facade, like an old southern house, white, well-kept, with curtains, but unaware that in the basement lay the archive of another life. Frank cried. I saw him wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, the very one I had once given him for our anniversary. He held it carefully, as if this gesture proved I loved her. Maybe he really did love the version of me in his head. The calm, polite, predictable woman. The chairwoman. Yes, that would be an apt description. Chairwoman, reliable, always in place, asks no questions, bears the weight. The kids spoke one after another. Stephen went first, always loved the microphone. Mom was incredibly generous. She taught us to be kind, patient, not to make noise when Dad was working. Catherine read a poem. She found it online, searching for touching poem for Mom. I recognized the lines. They were in 10 different blogs. Her voice trembled, but not with tears, with confusion. She loved me, but she didn't know me. Ellie cried. Holding her husband's hand, she said, Mom was always there. She just was. No demands, no expectations. That's rare. Yes, baby. It's rare to demand nothing for 40 years. So rare, it's not even remembered. It's just convenient. They said the words expected at funerals. She was always helpful. She lived for others. She was kind. And each word was not a lie, but also not the truth. I really helped, but not because I wanted to, because I was afraid to say no. I really lived for others, because I didn't believe I could live for myself. I really was kind, but kindness without boundaries is just a form of self-erasure. I looked at them all with a strange mix of irony and sadness. At my husband, lost in his tears. At my children, reading scripted speeches. At the neighbor who would later say, she was a true Southern lady, not like the ones you see nowadays. They all buried an image. A woman they invented because it was easier for them. And I was already on my way. Where to, I don't know. But certainly not back. The house was quieter than she remembered. After the funeral, everything seemed frozen, as if the air in the rooms had thickened, time slowed down, and even the refrigerator in the kitchen hummed more cautiously. Catherine stayed for a few more days to sort through Mom's things. That's what she told her father, that's what she told her brothers, but in truth, she didn't know why she stayed. She just couldn't leave right away. The attic smelled of dust and dried lavender. She climbed up there with a flashlight and a can of peach soda. Mom always kept it in reserve. Just in case you came, Cat. The wooden steps creaked, the light bulb flickered. And suddenly it was as if everything inside her stopped. Boxes. 5 large ones, marked by hand. C. 1,982 letters. Drafts. Women's Club do not open, smiley face. Personal. And one small box labeled, for Catherine only, open after my death. Catherine sank to her knees. She stared at the box for a long time. Her chest was pounding oddly sharp, as if Mom was near again. She opened it. Inside lay an envelope, neatly sealed. Beige, thick, with her full name, Catherine Louise Brooks. Next to it, several keys, an old flash drive, a small leather notebook, and a photo. Mom around 30, wearing glasses, laughing somewhere by the ocean. Catherine had never seen that picture before. She broke the seal on the envelope. If you are reading this, it means I am dead. And it means the time has come. You've always been smart, Catherine. You saw more than you said. I hope you have the courage to read this letter to the end and not judge me too harshly. In my life, I did many right things and even more convenient ones. I was a good wife, mother, neighbor. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I made coffee and knew when to be silent. But there was another me. The one you never knew. The one who didn't die, just hid. This box is the key. Not to some secret, but to who I really was. Forgive me for not being that woman in life. You deserve to know. Your mother? Evelyn. Catherine sat there, holding the letter to her chest. Then she opened the notebook. Inside were titles Parter Faraday 2, Essay on Invisibility, Why I Hate the Word Victim, My Husband Doesn't Know Who I Am, Letters to Myself That No One Was Supposed to Read. And suddenly, she cried, not hysterically. Tears just flowed, quietly. Mom, the one whose life seemed so predictable that even memories of her were gray, turned out to be someone else. Alive. Rebellious. Thinking. And maybe more like Catherine than she ever imagined. I was 25. The summer of 1976. America was celebrating its bicentennial. Flags everywhere, fireworks, people singing Born to Run and believing that anything was possible. And I believed too, naively, wholeheartedly, with every fiber of my soul. I was in my final year at UC Berkeley Literature Department, specializing in feminist theory and 20th century American novels. I dreamed of graduate school, teaching Toni Morrison, writing articles for Miss Magazine. And then Frank. He came to Berkeley on an exchange program, a chemical engineer from the South, straightforward, confident, with hands smelling of machine oil. He looked at me like I was his reward for everything. He said, "You're special, Evie. With you, it's peaceful. With you, it feels like home." 6 months later, I said yes when he proposed. We got married in September in Richmond at a small Protestant church where his aunt baked pies and my mother whispered, "Now you're a true Southerner, dear. That means family comes first." Family. Frank was just starting his career at DuPont, and I said, "Of course I'll take a break. I can start graduate school later. It's only a couple of years." There was no graduate school. 6 months later, I was pregnant. Our first child, Stephen. Smart, loud, demanding. I remember holding him at 3 in the morning, soaked in milk and sweat, thinking, this is all for love, for family. And then silence came. No invitations to teach, no writing, no one to talk to about books, politics, women, only recipes, strollers, discounts at Target. Mom called and said, "You wanted kids. Be happy." A friend from Berkeley wrote, "I'm at a conference in Chicago. And you?" I didn't reply. I deleted the message. Frank worked late, came home with the look of a winner. Tough day. I deserve some peace, right? And I nodded. Saturday with him, turned on Wheel of Fortune, brought him a beer, didn't complain. When I finally tried one evening when Stephen was teething and I hadn't slept for 3 days, I said, "Frank, I'm tired, He looked over his newspaper. "All women get tired, Evie. You're not the only one. You're just a little burned out." And at that moment, I think, I became convenient. I folded my desires neatly into a dresser deep inside my soul, closed the drawer, locked it. Anne became the one who is loved because she doesn't interfere, doesn't irritate, doesn't demand. Everyone praised me. His mother, "You're a treasure. Our Frank is lucky." The priest, "A true wife, an example." Neighbors, "Evelyn, you're like an angel. You always have everything under control." No one asked who was keeping me under control. I remembered Berkeley, the department, lectures, debates till midnight about Gloria Steinem and Sylvia Plath. But now I talked about peach varieties at Walmart and which car seat was safer. I didn't blame Frank. He just did what was familiar. He didn't cage me. I walked into the cage myself. Only with flowers, quilts, and family photos. I became the woman it was convenient to love. And the more I was silent, the stronger the family seemed. Only inside, year after year, it became empty. I didn't start any revolutions. I didn't slam doors, didn't pack suitcases, Didn't stage late-night talks full of shouting, sobbing, and, "You don't hear me." Number. I rebelled the way women do who have neither the time nor the right for drama. Silently, in small ways, unnoticed. In 1984, I bought myself a diary at Barnes & Noble hardcover, black, like a confession. I wrote in it at night, sitting in the bathroom so as not to wake Frank. Sometimes by hand, sometimes typing on an old typewriter. I didn't write about the kids. Not about recipes, but about myself. I called this diary Stories of a Convenient Wife. It was almost funny. Then came a magazine, a small feminist zine called Voices Unspoken, published in Seattle. I found the ad at the back of Miss Magazine, looking for stories of women whose lives have been lost in the shadows. I wrote an essay, under a pseudonym. E.B. Summers, my initials, and the summer I once thought was my season of freedom. The article was called, I Am Here, But Not Seen. It began, if I died today, my husband would say I was a good wife. And he wouldn't lie, but he wouldn't tell the truth either. They published it. I was sent $50 by check. I cashed it at a Bank of America ATM, opening a separate account for it. No one knew. More letters came. More stories. They appeared in small online forums, journals, newsletters I subscribed to with a fake email address. I was part of something. No one knew that the kind Mrs. Brooks from the 5th house on Elm Street was one of the voices of America's invisible wives. It seemed funny. They stopped seeing me, and I used it to my advantage. Neighbors said, "Evelyn, you're so modest. You never wanted anything extra, right? You probably don't have time for nonsense like finding yourself, huh?" I smiled, nodded. Then late at night I wrote, "They're surprised I don't strive for more, but if you stare at a woman long enough as if she were just wallpaper, she really does become wallpaper." My children grew up, left, came back. I still made them waffles, ironed their shirts, paid for classes, but inside I was already two women. One mother, wife, homemaker. The other, a quiet voice from the dark, tapping on the keys. We haven't disappeared, we were just waiting for our turn to speak. Frank? He didn't notice. He said, "You're the most stable one I have. I'm so happy it's peaceful with you. Steve's wife is always complaining, but you're gold." I laughed. Quietly. By myself. I became invisible so successfully that everyone started believing I never existed. But I did. In every line, every article, every dollar in my secret account. It wasn't a bright freedom. It was the underground of a woman's soul. And I lived in it. Freer than ever before. I thought it would get quieter with age. That the aching feeling that you've forgotten something important on the stove of life, but can't remember what exactly would fade. But it didn't get quieter with age. It got clearer. I was over 50 when I first enrolled in an online course called Introduction to Contemporary Prose from the University of Iowa. I didn't tell Frank. I just opened my laptop, sat down at the kitchen table next to the coffee maker and a vase of plastic tulips, and clicked Enroll. 2 weeks later, he finally noticed. One evening when I closed the laptop, he asked, "Is that a new television show?" I said, "Our number, it's a literature lecture." "About what?" "Literature. I signed up for a course." He laughed, really laughed, loudly. "You want to be what, a writer, at your age?" I said nothing. Just got up, washed a cup, and went back to reading. It wasn't just a course, it was a path back to myself. I learned to think again, to argue again, to believe again in the meaning of every word. I opened Zoom, sat among students young enough to be my children, and listened as they analyzed Joan Didion and Lydia Davis. I didn't feel old. I felt alive. Then there was a workshop on writing short stories. I sent my first text, "The Wife Who Didn't Cry When She Was Forgotten." Pseudonym, E.B. Summers. The professor wrote, "This text is like someone finally saying out loud what we all thought. Powerful. Thank you." I cried. In 2007, I finished my first novel. It was called Thin Walls, about a woman living in a house where every word spoken outside sounds louder than her own thoughts. I sent the manuscript to 2 small independent publishers. No expectations, just so I wouldn't regret it. A month later, I got a reply. They accepted the novel. No edits, no conditions, just, "This is a story that needs to be heard." I signed the contract. The pseudonym remained, E.B. Summers. Frank thought I was just doing something for myself again. He didn't care, never asked what I typed up at night. At barbecues, he told his friends, "Evelyn writes stuff online, like diaries. She does it for stress." In 2010, I received a small literary award in the category First Fiction by a Woman Over 50. I didn't go to the event. I watched the broadcast from the bedroom. A young actress reading an excerpt from my novel was trembling with excitement. I listened as my words sounded in a stranger's voice and still felt they were mine. No one knew. Neither Frank, nor the kids, nor my friends. I was quoted on Twitter, discussed on small forums. Once I even saw my pseudonym on a blog titled, "The Writer Who Speaks for All Forgotten Mothers." I smiled. Quietly. Without triumph. I was a lost woman. But I found my voice. And I wasn't going to lose it again. The weather that day was indifferent gray, warm like cooled down tea. They gathered in a small office on the second floor of a building in downtown Richmond, Catherine, Stephen, Ellie, and Frank. Mrs. Daniels, the lawyer, an elderly woman with gold-rimmed glasses, opened a folder and said, "The will of Mrs. Evelyn Brooks was drawn up in 2021 and notarized. Please listen until the end." Everyone nodded. Frank folded his hands over his stomach and frowned. Catherine gripped the armrest of her chair. She still couldn't wrap her head around the fact that Mom had hidden her life in boxes and letters, and that none of them, not even she herself, had known anything. The lawyer began reading. "I, Evelyn Louise Brooks, being of sound mind and memory, hereby direct the following." The first point was formal cremation, place of ashes scattering in the Shenandoah Mountains, not in the cemetery with Frank, as he had assumed. The second was unexpected. "All my savings, bank accounts, and the house in Richmond are to be placed in a trust for my 5 grandchildren. The funds may only be used for education, medical care, and starting their own businesses." Frank tensed slightly. "Wait," he muttered. The lawyer continued. "To my husband, Francis Brooks, I bequeath my collection of gardening books and the chair on the veranda. He knew how much I loved silence." Frank sat up straighter. "Is this a joke?" Catherine looked at him, eyebrows lowered. The lawyer didn't blink. The third point was the strangest. "All my copyrights, drafts, manuscripts, articles, and published works under the pseudonym E.B. Summers are bequeathed to my literary agent Lori Ann Harper, New York, Harper Literary LLC, as well as to my daughter Catherine Louise Brooks as co-heirs to my intellectual legacy." Catherine sharply lifted her head. "What?" "Excuse me." She turned to the lawyer. "Mom wrote books?" Mrs. Daniels smiled almost imperceptibly. "Oh yes, several. 2 of them were nominated for regional literary awards. 1 novel received a grant from the Women's Legacy Voices Foundation in 2011. All documents and rights are registered under the pseudonym. Everything is legal and very professionally done." Frank turned pale. Wait. E.B. Summers?" "Exactly," the lawyer nodded. "That is your wife. She started writing under this name over 20 years ago. You didn't know?" "No," all 3 children said in unison. Stephen leaned back in his chair, stunned. Ellie whispered, "I read her blog. My God, I quoted her in college." Catherine just remained silent. Inside, everything was boiling. Mom didn't just write. Mom had created a second life for herself. Quiet, bright, foreign, and real. The lawyer handed Catherine a yellow folder. "Here are the agent's contacts, royalty statements, and publication confirmations. Also, a personal letter from your mother." Catherine took the folder with trembling hands. Frank looked at everyone as if they were conspirators. This is nonsense. Why didn't she tell us?" The lawyer calmly closed the case. "Perhaps because she knew you wouldn't want to listen." The silence was deafening. The same silence Evelyn had lived in for 40 years. Now her words spoke for her. I couldn't sleep. The morning after the will reading, I woke up at 5:42 a.m. I sat on the bed in the room where I used to sleep as a child with faded floral wallpaper and a shelf still holding my old books, Little Women, Nancy Drew, A Wrinkle in Time. Everything seemed the same. Except for Mom. The mom I knew made pancakes for breakfast and said, "Don't rush. Life is not a train." The mom I didn't know wrote articles titled, "The Myth of the Perfect Wife as Social Anesthesia." Or, "I live in a house where the walls are thinner than my tolerance for silence." I opened her laptop. It was hidden in the top drawer of the secretary desk with a sign, "Do not touch. Old." Of course, Frank never touched it. He was afraid even to reprogram the microwave. I entered the password. It worked. Courage 1978. At first, I didn't understand what it meant. Then I remembered. 1978 was the year she was supposed to start graduate school at Berkeley, but she didn't because I was born, because of family. On the desktop, there were 3 folders. Lectures. Summer's Archive. To Cat, only. I was trembling as if they were about to drag me onto a stage in my underwear. The flash drive I found in the box matched the content. It contained audio files. Mom was reading them herself. Her voice was slightly lower than in life, composed, confident. She began like this. "I am not dead. I've just been silent for a long time. If you are listening to this, it means you are my witness, not just my daughter." I started digging deeper. The pseudonym E.B. Summers turned out to be a real literary figure. Not a bestseller, but a cult author. She wrote for Guernica, The Rumpus, The Millions, and a couple of times for Slate. She appeared in podcasts under the pseudonym, with her voice altered. She had Facebook followers I didn't have. Her fans quoted her. "She writes what we're afraid to even think." She wrote about pain. About how love can turn into a cage of plush and habit. About a husband who never hit or humiliated, he just didn't see. About a home where you're respected like a comfortable couch. In the drawer, I found a key, metal with a yellow keychain. It fit an old shoebox on the top shelf of the closet. Inside were letters from women. Real women. They wrote to her. Thanked her for the truth, for the text, for the courage, for finally someone saying it out loud. One woman from Colorado wrote, "Your text stopped my divorce. I read it to my husband. For the first time, he understood why I sit in the car, not going inside." I looked at those letters like a map of a world my mom had carved out of silence. She had a second P.O. box at the UPS store on Main Street. There, she received correspondence, royalties, edited manuscripts from publishers. I called them, they confirmed. They even remembered her. Oh, Mrs. Brooks, pleasant, quiet, very punctual, always with a book, always wearing glasses and red lipstick. I sat in her chair on the veranda, the very one she bequeathed to Frank. And I thought, how did we all miss her? How did we all miss this? And then another feeling came. Not guilt. Pride. Mom lived 2 lives. One polite, quiet, expected. The other brave, bitter, real. And now, I felt her voice had not ended. It continued in me. 3 months had passed. The book was published under the same name she had always used, E.B. Summers. The title taken from Mom's drafts. Being Convenient. Notes of an Unnoticed Wife. A memoir. That's how they classified it, but in essence, it was a confession turned inside out. The publisher insisted on a note at the beginning. The author passed away in 2025. These pages are her voice, preserved by her daughter. At first, small waves. Reviews in feminist blogs. A few Goodreads reviews saying things like, "I'm 48. I felt every line. This is not just a book, it's a mirror. Why does no one say this out loud?" Then NPR. The host read a passage with a tremor in her voice. Listeners began writing live. She said what I was afraid to say to my husband. She named the feeling I couldn't put into words. A week later, Amazon Top 10 in Women's Memoirs 40-plus category. Then television. Suddenly, a PBS show, an interview with a literary critic, an article in The New Yorker. The Quiet Revolution: Why Baby Boomer Women Read Summers Like the Bible. Frank was invited on one of the talk shows. He sat awkwardly in a rumpled jacket next to a photo of Mom. The journalist asked, "Did you know who your wife really was?" Frank was silent. Then he said, "I thought I did. But now I understand I only knew the part of her that looked at me when I came home. Everything else, she kept to herself. I never really knew her." And in that moment, for the first time, he looked truly small. And Mom the Dead, gone, unnoticed Evelyn, was in every podcast, in every quote, in every "she said it for us." And I knew. She had won. We sat by the lake in Oregon. The water was as still as the breath of a dream. My daughter Madison held tightly to my hand, and I was holding an old book, Mom's diary, yellowed and worn by time. I opened it to the page where Mom had written in 1983, "I don't want to be remembered as kind. I want to be remembered as alive. With pain, mistakes, fears, but alive." Mom's voice echoed in my mind, gentle, determined, as if she were sitting right there beside me. "Mom," Madison asked, "who was Grandma really?" I smiled. "She wasn't a saint," I said. "She was alive." The wind played with the leaves, and in that moment, it seemed as if even time had paused to listen. The Mom I had known all my life, and the Mom I had just discovered, both were a part of me. She wasn't just a convenient wife, not just a mother or neighbor. She was a woman who lived, fought, dreamed, and left us her voice. Final shot. The firelight flickers in the dark. Quiet, strong, unforgettable, the figure of a woman sitting by the fire. And even if she couldn't be seen, her voice rings louder than all.